Thank you for joining me on the Sports in the Making podcast. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Joining me on this episode is Drew Irvine, a former event producer at ESPN who's now designing one of the most popular sports video games in history. We'll talk about what went into changing MLB The Show's announcing and broadcast look based on his experience, what some of his roles were at ESPN, and how baseball is a big part of his life. It's a fun conversation, and I hope you enjoy episode number 31. If you're listening to this podcast, be sure to subscribe to the Sports in the Making YouTube channel to see visuals of what we discuss. I am with my old baseball pal, Drew Irvine, who I met in Bristol, Connecticut about 14 years ago while we were working for ESPN. Drew worked his way up through the network and produced about 100 events per year in his time there and at Longhorn Network. He is currently game design manager at PlayStation, overseeing the presentation, audio, and commentary for the legendary game, MLB The Show. Andrew, I'm glad to have you in the Sports in the Making podcast.
Yeah, Don. It's good to talk to you again. It's been a while.
All right, so we're going to get into your career throughout the next hour or so, but we'll also talk about what goes into making sports. You up for that?
I'm up for it. Let's do it.
All right. What was your first thought on getting into sports television?
I don't know. I probably had a pretty typical path. I just loved sports growing up. I grew up in Seattle in the 90s watching, Ken Griffey Jr. and Sean Kemp and Gary Payton, and just grew to love sports. Played baseball and basketball growing up, and I went to college and tried to further pursue that through journalism. I was a sports writer, and when I graduated in 2007, it unfortunately was about the time people stopped reading newspapers or reading stuff in general. So I kind of just had to pivot. So it wasn't like I grew up thinking I was going to be in sports TV or anything like that. It just kind of seemed like the right route to take with the way the media was trending and everything like that. And then what kind of got me into the industry is during my college years near Seattle, I would work for ESPN just as a runner utility during Monday Night Football, or back when the Sonics were there during NBA games or Mariners games or Washington Huskies football games. So I just got to know a lot of the ESPN operations producers and the people that kind of do a lot of the technical work. And I graduated college and I worked one of those games, and I kind of just started asking people like, hey, how do I do this full time? So it wasn't like I set out to do it. I graduated college, needed a job, loved sports, and I didn't think newspapers was really the way to go at that time.
Yeah, freelancing is how I got into it as well. And, you have people who kind of help you along the way. But when you first had the idea of possibly working with ESPN, how did that work out for you?
It was funny, man. It was an interesting road. I had some, like you said, people that really guided me when I was looking for jobs, and I had a lot of interviews. I had some funny interviews with ESPN. Right when I graduated college, actually, my first opportunity is they wanted me to be the cart driver on the sideline of the football game. That the cameraman's on a lift. For whatever reason, that didn't work out, but I had forgotten about that till recently because that was my first opportunity. And then I was still pushing for interviews, and I got an interview. The second one was as I would work for the Bottom Line, like as a researcher, which is crazy. Like my first interview was like a phone test where they ask you all these sports questions and stuff like that. And I passed that one, and I was like, oh, this is easy. And then the second round, they emailed me this 30-page test that I had like 30 minutes to fill out and send back, and it was way like this was like Stump the Schwab type of questions, and so that was a little bit over my head, but it worked out. It wouldn't have been a good fit for me either way. So then a few months passed. I was actually back home helping a friend just do construction, and I got a job interview for a PA for the remote production department, and I actually didn't get hired for that either. They told me you were close, but we're going to go a different direction. And then I was bummed, went back to helping my friend build a house, and then they called me back like 3 months later, and now they were in the middle of the college football, and they were just like, hey, we're swamped, we need more bodies here. And the crazy thing is they said, like, we're offering you this job, but we need you to start on Monday. And this was on a Wednesday, and I lived in Seattle, and I had never been east of Oklahoma in my whole life. So between this Wednesday and this Monday, I had to move to Connecticut and start a job at ESPN. So it was chaos.
Do you remember your first day?
You know, I don't have vivid memories. Everything happened so quick that I couldn't even buy a car. I remember that. So I lived at apartments in Bristol, and I had to like walk to ESPN for the first couple months that I worked there. So it's really funny because there's all these cars like in line, you know, to get in the front gate, and I had to like walk and just show my badge and everything. But honestly, it was such a blur. I was such like a young kid, just starstruck by being in Bristol, Connecticut, and like seeing these gods of the sports industry like Chris Berman and Stuart Scott and those kind of guys just walking around. It was just like a surreal, the first couple of weeks are just a surreal feeling.
Yeah. When you talk about remote production, PA in that group, explain what your responsibilities are. I know, but for people who might not otherwise know, what goes into that job?
Yeah. So when I started, I mean, you're pretty much as low on the totem pole as you can get out there. So I was in Bristol, but I was supporting all the games that were all over the country. So anything they needed from Bristol sent to the site. That would kind of be my job. So I would get everything, you know, all the tapes with all the highlights that they needed for the games, everything from mic flags to banners that they hang out there. That pretty much takes a few days because you're just, you know, it's not like now where you're sitting in front of a computer making a highlight reel. Like you're actually going to the videotape library and sometimes scrolling through like 50 melts to find 6 good plays of the quarterback or whatever. So I'd say like the first 3 days of the week are just gathering footage that the crew needs. And then you get your bin ready and you ship it off to whatever, Stillwater, Oklahoma, or Lubbock, Texas, or wherever the game is that your crew is doing. And unfortunately at that time, you're not really traveling much. Sometimes they would get you out to like a bowl game or something like that, but you're pretty much huddled up. We had the remote PAs all were in like a double wide trailer outside of Building 5 at that point. So it was crazy times. It was pretty fun. It was kind of like starting college again, right? There was like 25 of us that worked in this trailer just hustling around and sending all the footage out all over the country. It's kind of crazy times.
I remember that trailer because I was in Building 5 at the time.
Yeah.
But so from packing bins, I mean, it gets down to shipping labels to return the box, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you get to getting more responsibility after that? Like, do you have to have 0 errors in a certain amount of time, or? Yeah,
I think the one thing, like, I'm not going to say that the technical side of the job was very hard, but it was very important to be accountable, you know, and communicate well. And so I just made sure, you know, everything that was asked of me was delivered and I was always available. And I think that just goes a long ways in whatever industry you're in, right? Like you want to be the guy that they can count on. I think that job specifically did a really good job of kind of weeding out people that maybe weren't reliable, or it kind of let the producers know that you could be counted on. And I always tried to do more that was asked, you know, like none of the producers ever really asked me my ideas for this football game, but I would kind of proactively send out like, hey, you know, this running back is from this small town and his grandfather is so-and-so. Maybe here's a picture of his grandfather playing at the school. And I would try to go kind of beyond what I was asked. And I think the producers appreciated that, even if it wasn't always the best idea. I think they appreciated that I was trying to make an impact on the show through a creative angle.
Some of the things I've heard from some of my guests is taking initiative and doing a little bit extra, not necessarily in the workload per se, but in the ideas section. Because if you don't have those ideas, then you might be missing something, and that could miss out on improving the show.
Yeah.
So moving from PA to AP, what are an AP's responsibility in remote production?
Yeah, so it was pretty exciting. Me being from the West Coast, I wasn't thrilled about being in Bristol, Connecticut all day, especially in the winter. So once they put me on I think the first traveling assignment I had was on a college football package where I was the AP doing graphics. That was super exciting to me because now I really did get to make an impact on the on the broadcast, right? So you spend a lot of the week just researching ideas and coming up with the graphics and working with the producers and talent and all that to come up with all the supporting graphics they need, and just make sure you're contributing to the show, and you're buttoned up with everything, you're organized. And so you would travel out before the set day. You'd have usually all day, hand your packet of paper that you've been working on all week to the font coordinator, who would then like type up all the graphics. Come home, build your font board, which if you haven't seen one before, it probably just looks like controlled chaos, just a huge manila folder with 10,000 numbers on them. But once you do it more, it makes a lot more sense. And then execute calling up graphics when you needed to during the game. So that was kind of like the first time I felt really challenged from like a live setting. Being able to execute in a live setting is a lot different than sitting in Bristol and or in an edit room. When you don't have time to think, you kind of just have to react and think ahead. So that was the first time I felt like really challenged from a live TV perspective.
And there's so much competition within the network from people who are in the same positions to get to that next level. What do you think it took for you to get from AP to producer?
AP to producer? Yeah, I think, well, just to continue on with what I said earlier, I think just always trying to drive the production rather than wait for the producer to ask you. And I knew once I became a producer, it's so nice when everyone's giving you ideas and it's not all just coming from one person. And I think it provides more of a like diverse opinions on the show and stuff like that, if those ideas are coming from different areas. So I think it as an AP, I continued to just think like a producer, think about broader things than just my job, nail your job, but also I started thinking like a producer. And honestly, like I said earlier, it's not that complicated. Like I was dependable. I was on time. I had a good attitude. I treated people well. And I think that goes a long ways when you're talking about how do you get promoted. Just be a good person, be on time, and right. Try to think like the role that's one step ahead of you, maybe.
Stepping back to the AP position, you did launch Longhorn Network, which took you to Austin. What is it like building a network from the ground up?
Yeah, that was crazy because like at ESPN, right, I did several seasons of college football and some big broadcasts where you have all the bells and whistles. And so I think the most challenging part was like, and I'm sure you mentioned earlier the different types, all the different types of sports you work. So the hardest part was just we did all these Olympic sports that I had never worked on before. We did rowing, we did tennis, college tennis, which is a lot different than the Grand Slams that I had worked on at ESPN. Down the line, I became really knowledgeable about volleyball, but like the first year, it's not just producing a game. You're kind of like learning the rules and trying not to sound stupid when you're dealing with analysts that are gold medalists in their respective sports, So that was honestly the hardest part, is just trying not to sound stupid while you're also trying to cover these sports, and you're learning about the sport at the same time you're trying to do a good job of producing that thing, and you want to do justice to all these athletes that have been dedicating their lives to this sport too. So like it's kind of a lot of pressure just to make sure that you know enough about the rules, the timing, the commercial formats, like all the kind of stuff that goes into TV that is obvious when you're doing baseball or basketball or football because you've been watching it your whole life. But there was a lot of other things, but for me, that was the hardest part.
Now moving on back to producer then, do you remember the first producing job you had?
I'm fairly certain it was a college softball game. Again, I had worked one Women's College World Series when I was at ESPN, but college, I know baseball really well, but college softball there's a lot of differences there. Once you watch the two sports, you realize that. So yeah, college softball, I think, was the first one. And I'm sure it was like a totally irrelevant game, but for me at the time, I took it on like it was the Super Bowl and probably was way too hard on myself at the time. But yeah, it was a college softball game. I was nervous. It is interesting though, like to me, one of the like I think doing graphics as an AP is the hardest thing that I ever did in a TV truck, including producing and ISO producing and ADing. I did most of the production side roles. I was definitely nervous, but I actually think producing for just maybe it's just my skill set was the easiest job that I did along the way. Not to say that it's easy, because it's really not, but I did feel prepared. But yeah, I was pretty nervous. There's just like all that responsibility, you have a lot of people that are depending on your guidance and stuff like that. So you kind of have to try to at least put a brave face on, even if you're terrified inside.
Did you have any mentors that kind of helped you along?
Well, at Longhorn Network, Pat Lowry was great to me, and I really look up to her and still do. We still communicate a lot. So she was great. At ESPN, I did several seasons of football under Steve Ackles, who produced a lot of college football and now is an executive on a few different sports, I think. But from him, more just like the truck demeanor, and I learned a lot from him. Working with Phil Dean, who's now the producer of Monday Night Football, I really looked up to him as a PA and AP, working under him, and again, just his mannerisms and the way he treated people in a really kind way always had an impact on me. So those were a few people.
The one thing that I've had a couple of responses on some of my guests is, when you travel, there's always something that goes on either with travel or in a TV truck that can make your life miserable. What kinds of stories do you have? You've got to have some.
And yeah, I will put me on the spot a little bit, but I do remember going back to the early days when I was still pretty nervous. I think it was my first ever college. It was one of my first college football games that I did graphics on, and it was at South Carolina. And the AD was literally counting us onto air, and the truck completely lost power. But it turned out it wasn't just the truck; it was like the entire block around the truck. So it wasn't like normally a generator just goes out, right, and they fire back up and you're back running in 15 minutes. Like, it was like out for an hour, I think. But they continued to play the game, right? We were just off air. And I was so nervous because like nothing worked. This was before like you had stats on your phone or anything like that. And we had no internet. So I literally went into the stadium and like found a seat in the stadium and told the ops producer to call me if like they got power back up. And I was like taking notes on my notepad, trying to look up at all
the game continued.
The game was still going on.
Yeah.
And we didn't know when we were going to come back on the air. And I needed to have some graphic to show the viewers like some recap of what the players had been doing and everything like that. And it wasn't like, some of the bigger shows now where everything's interfaced and you just call up a graphic and it gives all the stats. Like, we had to manually type in how many rushing yards this guy had, how many passing yards the quarterback had, how many turnovers. So I went into the stadium and found like a great Jumbotron that had like all the stats, and I kind of like jotted them down. So that was just like a funny one early on where I kind of feel like I had to scramble, and it all worked out. But yeah, I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about a production assistant, associate producer, and producer, but there's a lot of producer titles thrown around there. So one of the things that I've seen in your bio is you were an associate producer and a producer on the front bench, but you've also been an ISO producer. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to people what that is?
Sure. Yeah. And that's honestly how I kind of figured out that I would be able to produce games, because it seems pretty intimidating when you're sitting on the back bench. But I began ISO producing, which is basically you're helping the producer throughout the week come up with the video elements you're going to have to support whatever game you're working on. And then more importantly, in the game, you're kind of in charge of a lot of the replay sequences. So a lot of times these shows have a lot of different cameras and the producer's trying to do a lot of things. So the ISO producer is kind of the assistant to the producer that helps line up replays, especially when there's like a replay challenge and the producer's on the phone with the replay official and trying to talk to the announcers. It's very helpful to have somebody by his side that is telling him what the best looks of the play that just happened was. go into commercial break, rollouts, you set those things up. You kind of help the AD with the timing of all the elements. So I guess the shortest way to say it is you're an assistant to the producer, basically. And that's kind of when I learned. And I actually did sit right next to the producer when I was the ISO producer. So like I said, that's kind of when I realized after doing a few seasons, like, hey, I could do this. Like I could probably just move over one spot and do this.
When you do move over to that next spot, you work with talent, you work with announcers, reporters. I know I've gotten a lot of questions from aspiring announcers on, what can I do, or how can I do this? And a lot of times I tell them it's just initiative, but when they're actually in there, it's not just appearing on camera. You have to be knowledgeable. But what's the relationship, according to you, between the producer and the announcers?
I think for me, like I just tried to be honest with them, and like we were saying earlier, tell them that I'm here to just like take what they know and transfer it onto television, because they know a ton about whatever sport we're covering, and I was kind of the translator, I guess, to get that onto television. So I would never try to act like I knew too much, tell them that like, hey, you're the expert. I just want to get your point across in the best way possible. And I think the talent appreciated that, because I was making them look better along the way by being upfront and not trying to be smarter than the announcers. Just tell them like, hey, you're driving the show. I'm just along to help. And then I think it's just important to you, and I didn't learn this right away, is just to be concise with both your communication, but also your planning going in. I used to just try and think of every idea there was for a game. There's hundreds of storylines if you sit and think about it long enough. But then once I learned to kind of like hone in on what the maybe 3 or 4 most important things are in this and really tell those stories, the job became a lot easier for me. And so instead of reaching out to the announcers and asking them to tell me everything they know, like I just really tried to get their the most important things and really come up with unique angles to tell those stories. So I think that was the thing that was the best for me, was just not trying to do their job, just trying to help them get their point across.
What do you think makes a good play-by-play announcer and an analyst and then a reporter?
Interesting. Play-by-play, I think, is extremely difficult to do well, because I do think you need to bring emotion to it. It is an entertainment business, but you also have to be aware of what's happening in the stadium and know that could provide the best entertainment at that time. So knowing when to help the viewer and knowing when to get out of the way. So I think the best kind of play-by-play announcers are kind of like the guide, right? That's guiding the viewer through something, but also knowing when to step out of the way and just let them enjoy what they're trying to enjoy. That's kind of my ideal play-by-play. The analyst is just telling you something that you weren't able to see on the screen. I think learning through them in a very clear and easy way that maybe not people that aren't experts in the sport would understand. So I always would try to tell people to, like, explain, don't tell me what just happened. Like, tell me why, or tell me what's going to happen. I think that is probably the biggest thing with an analyst. And then I was lucky enough to work with Holly Rowe a lot as a reporter. And to me, she was great, because she was genuinely really curious about all the stories and extremely passionate about it. It's easy to find the stories that are handed to you by the PR, the PR people for each team. But she would always dig past that and find unique ideas. I can't stand it when like the reporter is reporting on something that was in the newspaper that week or that you saw in the game notes. The really good reporters find stories and teach the audience something that they didn't know before and that was unable to be found anywhere else. Like, the reporter actually dug up this story and you're learning it for the first time. And I think that's what really sets reporters apart from my perspective.
I like that we're on the same page in that respect, because there's so many people, again, I just said this, but there's so many people that want to be announcers. Mm-hmm. I just talked to a gentleman a couple of days ago, and he said he wanted to do it, but he didn't have any idea of the direction. And so I was trying to help him identify where his strengths would be. We had a really good conversation, but he had so many questions, which were probing questions, which I like to hear because then you know they're a little serious. But it's not an easy job.
No, I don't think people understand how challenging it is and how hard the really good reporters work.
What are some of the your favorite events to cover?
College World Series was my favorite event at ESPN. I covered that for 10 years, from 2008 to 2018. And I just loved it. I love, my mom's family's from Omaha, Nebraska. So like I felt kind of a connection with the city. I'm a big baseball guy. So like it was so cool those 2 weeks. Baseball was like everywhere in the town. Everybody was talking about it. So it just kind of felt like it's a cool vibe that's indescribable. If you haven't been to the College World Series and you have an opportunity to go, I definitely recommend it. So yeah, I'd say that was my favorite. College football. I grew up watching Washington Huskies when they were national championship contenders in the 90s, and the tailgating and I can still sing like the fight songs in my head, and I didn't even go to Washington. The college football Saturday, I think, is something that's super cool. So I think, to answer your question, like any event that has like, the whole town around it and you can feel the vibe in the city, like I think that's what really drove me the most. I think those games and events for sure.
Well, I started off saying that we're kind of baseball colleagues,
yeah.
And it seems like that's been a theme throughout your entire career.
Yep.
Putting all of your experience together, you had an opportunity to work with PlayStation. Mm-hmm. How did they find you, or how did you find them?
Yeah, so it was kind of a funny story. So basically, towards the end of my career at ESPN, I started to realize like it's actually, I'm from the West Coast. I grew up in Seattle. Now I live in San Diego. And I wanted to get back closer to home. I had met my wife several years before that, and she was from California. And unfortunately, there really just isn't much of a path at ESPN to be a producer that lives on the West Coast. I don't know if there are any that do anymore. I knew that would be a challenging route to take. So I kind of started looking for jobs. And then like coincidentally, I was at my wife's family's house, and I was playing NCAA football with my nephew, who was probably 13 or 14 at the time. And it was NCAA football 2013 or 14. And all the graphics were ESPN. And like the announcers, I think, were Kirk Herbstreit and Brad Nessler. And I was like, I know all these elements. Like I helped put all these elements on the element reels back in Bristol, and it was all the stuff that I was used to. And I'm like, in my head, I'm kind of like, and I know all the replay angles those are replay angles we do. I'm like, there's got to be somebody that has TV experience that works behind the scenes with these games, right? So that was kind of just churning in my head, but it was just something I had never really thought about. And I started looking at jobs on the West Coast, and I was looking for TV jobs. Honestly, I thought I would continue my career in TV, and then I saw a PlayStation job. They were looking for a basically live TV producer to do all the things that I do now. So I just threw my hat out there. Yeah, that was in the beginning of 2019. And I got an interview and got another interview and flew out to San Diego, where we're based, and started here in April of 2019. So it was pretty crazy how it all came together. Like the two things, like me playing that video game and me finding this job, were completely coincidental, but those happened like 2 weeks apart. So that was just crazy to me.
Are you a gamer?
I mean, I very casually, as you know, at ESPN, you don't have much sitting around time. So I was growing up, like in college mostly, not much in high school, but once I got to college, we would always play Madden or NCAA football or MLB The Show. And then once I became kind of a young professional, I just didn't really have much time, but I kept up with the trends a little bit. But I was very straightforward with them, that like I was very casual, and they weren't looking like, a lot of the people that we work with are not heavy gamers. Like I think you have to have a good balance of people that are, and then people that, building a baseball game, there's a ton of people that I work with that are, ex-players, ex-professionals, because you really have to think like a baseball player to design a baseball game. And we have to capture all the motions that real baseball does. And in my job, I'm kind of the TV broadcaster equivalent of the professional baseball player. They wanted somebody that had really done the job, to make their game as authentic as possible from like the broadcast angle as well.
Did they have that prior to you getting there? Or
No, they
was
didn't.
it something there? Okay.
Yeah.
So when you came in, how did you get the job? Basically, what did you tell them?
I kind of just, I mean, they were looking for me, so I didn't have to tell them much, honestly. Like I have pretty much went through kind of what I've gone through with you and what I had done in the past. And I did play the game enough to give them some like immediate feedback on changes that I would make and additions that I would do. So it was like the perfect fit. It was what I was looking for. I wanted to travel less. I wanted to live on the West Coast, and it's been a dream. Like having weekends. I still pinch myself like having weekends and like a 9-to-5 job. It's just so odd to me, and it's like. Yeah. The other thing they don't really tell you when you go into sports broadcasting, because you're like this big sports fan, right? But then when you get into sports broadcasting, you don't really have time to watch sports anymore because you're traveling on all the weekends and stuff. So if I was doing college football, I was kind of half watching what was going on in other games, but you're concentrating on the game that you're working on. And then NFL games are on Sunday and you're traveling back all day from a small college town somewhere. So I missed being a sports fan. And so that's really fun for me. Like the last couple of years, I've been just trying to catch up, and took my son to the big house in Michigan last year. We've gone to bowl games. I've been to a ton of baseball games with my son and with my wife, and just really tried to catch up on like the 10 years of not being a sports fan that I missed out on. So that wasn't really your question, but that was a perk. So anyways, to answer your question, like it was kind of just the perfect fit. And I think we both knew it, because I wasn't sold when I went to the interview that I was going to be like in love with this job, because I didn't really know what it was. And then they kind of told me, once they just explained to me what the job was, and then when I explained them what my skills were, we kind of both agreed that it would be a really good fit, and it has been. So
your title is game design manager.
Mm-hmm.
Explain what that is.
Sure.
The continuation of the title, because it does deal with broadcasting within the game. And then how did you start, and where is it going?
Yeah, well, my job title has already changed a couple times. I started out just as a senior designer. So I came in and I was, right away, I knew there was new replay angles I wanted to put in and cameras. We've got new announcers last year, so I was pretty instrumental in the bringing in new commentators into our game. So that was kind of what I did initially, and then now I still do a lot of that. But I also our team of presentation and commentary and audio, I just kind of oversee that and make sure that everybody's aligned with like what direction we're going to and what we're going to be working on in the coming year. And as you know, like for a project that's that big and that happens every year, it's really important to keep everybody on track and make sure that you're not trying to do too much or not trying to do enough. I kind of manage, I guess, the production cycle of presentation, commentary, and audio at MLB The Show. So it's a pretty big umbrella, actually.
When you want to implement an idea into the game,
yeah,
you have to work with designers, and I would imagine I don't even know what the titles are there. Yeah. Programmers.
Yeah.
Is it a push-pull type of thing, or do they say, "Oh, that would be cool," and they make it happen?
Totally. It's more of the latter. Honestly, like the people I work with are great, and they're like so much smarter than me that it's crazy. It's like I get to come up with all these wild ideas, and then sometimes they're like, "No, we can't do that." But most of the times they're like, "Oh yeah, I did that already. It's done." And it was so different from ESPN. Like, and I get, this isn't a knock on ESPN. I get all the challenges that they have to go through, but things just happen so much quicker here. Like I'll have an idea and I'll see it on the screen the next day, right? Like that could never happen. Like I'll give you an example. a deep fly ball that's barely foul, right? Like I had this idea where I'm like, okay, we know this isn't real life. We know exactly how foul the ball was, so we could pop up a graphic that says like foul by 3.5 feet, right? So I mentioned that to our programmer, and I mean, like 6 hours later, it was in the game. Whereas you can imagine if you had that idea at ESPN, both the technical things that they would have to figure out, a ton of different stuff. Like we're able to just innovate a lot quicker because of the fact that we just have so much data at our fingertips.
Yeah, and you're in a controlled environment too, which
totally,
which helps.
It does.
What are some of the changes that you've been able to make? If the game just came out here in March or so of 2022.
Yep.
What, for people who haven't seen it, what can they expect to see that was different from the previous version?
Yeah, well, this year we brought in announcers from ESPN, John Sciambi and Chris Singleton, who have been awesome. And I had worked with them previously at ESPN, and I'm a huge fan. So I knew they would do a great job. And we actually had been recording with them since I came on in like 2019, 2020, somewhere around there. So hundreds of hours of recording went into that. So that was probably our biggest change. We'd had our previous announcer was Matt Veskerjan, and he had been with the game for 16 or 17 years, I believe. So it was a pretty big change to bring in new announcers. Honestly, like I did a lot of stuff just to, like, you would know as a producer, you just see a replay of a strikeout or something and you're kind of like, oh, we would never show that angle. So there was a lot to be done, just kind of like unwinding what was there and putting in more realistic camera angles, replays, end of inning. I've gotten to really enjoy working with our art team. We get to design, like, a really cool thing that we do is every year we have 2 new graphics packages. So, like when a network has the Super Bowl, they often run out like a new graphics package. So I get to come up with 2 of those every year, which is really fun. So I do the least amount of work. All the artists are the real heroes of this, but like I help them come up with concepts and, look at real life examples that other broadcasts are doing and kind of mix it together. So that's a really fun part of my job, is just coming up with how the aesthetic of the graphics are going to look, the replay wipes, all of those. And so we do 2 of those each year. So every year we get to come up with new stuff and kind of innovate through that as well. Like I said earlier, we have a lot of access to data that maybe isn't available in real life. So like the innovation part is really fun for me. Yeah.
The announcing team, John Sciambi and Chris Singleton, I produced with Sciambi down in Cancun for college basketball many years ago. So there's that connection.
There you go.
Were you the one that said, hey, I want these guys, or was it like a team collaborative effort? Like, how do you get those guys?
Yeah, it was a team thing. I think I definitely had a pretty good influence on it, but I think everybody kind of had to get on the same page. So it was a team decision for sure. The way that Boog can call up really big moments and you be so excited, but he also has like that dry sense of humor that I think works really well in a video game, where he can be lighthearted and fun. And then like he's an absolute baseball encyclopedia as well. So I just always thought he would be really great for that job. So I definitely campaigned hard on his behalf. And then Chris was his partner on Sunday, so it worked out really well. The other thing that I did was worked with some of my old colleagues at ESPN to actually get their real recordings that they do on Sunday night. So we actually get isolated voice of that. So we can actually use calls that are happening in real life games. We use those in our game, which is pretty cool. I'm not sure any other games have done that before, but we're using calls from real baseball games in our game, which is pretty fun.
When you say Boog, that is John Sciambi's nickname.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
That's it. No, that's okay. Because when we first started talking again, you mentioned Boog, and I know that there's a couple of Boogs out there, and I just wanted to make sure it was John Sciambi.
Yep.
So how does the game work when each play is so distinct? In other words, how does the game adjust with the announcer call and the analyst commentary? Because that's it's a ton of calls that you have to make.
It's a ton of calls. Yeah. And baseball, in my opinion, is the hardest one because of the crazy amount of different situations that can happen, right? Like you think of a basketball game, like you're always trying to score a basket. Soccer, you're always trying to score a goal. Football, you're always trying to score a touchdown, and you're kind of moving one from one way to the other. And there's not that many, when you think about it, like variations in a basketball game that can happen. But baseball, like, how many outs there are, how many strikes there are, how many balls there are, who's on base, where's the game at? There's, I think, 2,000 players in our game that we need the names for all of them. There's 1,000 different types of catch an outfielder can make. Yeah, as you can imagine, the amount of content that we have to do to create that is pretty amazing. So creating that content is half of it. We have a great team of writers that write all the scripts for them. And then we also have a team that implements the audio into the right place. So when a certain play happens, we can identify what type of play that was and play the appropriate line for all of that. So yeah, it's a pretty sophisticated system to get all that to play at the right time. And then you just have to work on not making it too repetitive, because you really want to immerse the person to think that there's announcers that are really watching your game. So that's the hardest part, is just making sure it doesn't repeat itself, making sure it's got to be kind of generic, because we can't, like, literally, there's just not enough time in the world to have like every single nuance of baseball. So you have to like toe that line between making sure it's specific, but just for logistics sake, it has to be somewhat general.
Continuing on with the conversation with Boog and Singleton, theshow.com, which I believe is part of PlayStation, did an announcement in March 2022 that said there were 128 separate recording sessions that you did, including 350 recording hours and 45,000 lines of audio. How in the world do you plan something like that, and how long does it take?
Yeah, I mean, like, when you put it like that, it sounds really complicated, but it's many short sessions backed up into each other. You just have to be very organized. I'm not as involved in the writing of the commentary. We have a staff of writers that do that, and we have a very capable person that handles the direction of those actual recording sessions. So yeah, they're just very organized. I give credit to Boog and Singy, because they're just reading script, and they have to stay as energized as possible, and they do a really good job of that. So like, kudos to them as well to be able to bring the same energy that they bring when they're at the ballpark, when they're in our studio in San Diego. So yeah, I would just say it's a ton of work. It's a ton of writing. We have to be very organized, and you kind of like just go down the list of, you come up with all the stuff you need to do a baseball game, from base hits to what the weather's like to what stadium you're at. And you just keep checking stuff off until you have enough stuff to fill the broadcast.
A couple of years ago, I listened to Madden's Game, which is episode 4 of season 2 of the 30 for 30 podcast. Mm-hmm. We talked. You said you've listened to it, but they talked to David Hill, the president of Fox Sports, who worked with Madden to try and get the game, the broadcast, to be more like the video game for Madden from EA Sports, and so Madden said, one of his goals was to make the video game look like television, and David Hill said, we want to make the game on television look like video.
I know.
And so that time, I think they said it was 1984, was when they started that process. It's come so far. Is real life imitating art and vice versa? Yeah,
it goes both ways for sure. And actually, I remember when I applied for this job, like I knew that was the case. Like, I think I remember the first down line that you see on the football field came from an idea from Madden. And like, now you see Skycam all the time. And I think that debuted on the XFL, but that's basically the view you get when you're playing a football video game. So I wanted to be able to innovate TV still through video games. I felt like I could even still be driving what TV's doing through some of the stuff that we do in our game, and you're just able to think way more outside of the box, because imagine imagine you were producing a real life game, but you had the ability to put a camera wherever you wanted to put it. And you had the ability to have, instead of 7 cameras, you can have as many cameras as you want. You can literally put a camera however you want. It doesn't cost you another dollar to do that. So it's really fun from a creative standpoint. I had one thing that we did last year was my favorite shot of a home run when you're producing a game is when you get lucky and you have the handheld that's in the outfield and the ball comes right towards the camera. And it only happens a couple times a year because it just has to hit right where the camera is standing. But I thought about it, and we already know, like, we're able to know exactly where the ball lands, right? So we could put a camera there and show a replay of any time. And like that, there's stuff like that you could never do in TV. But now anytime there's a home run, we can show a camera from where the ball landed, and just put that camera there. So there's stuff like that where you just get, like, it gets me excited to just think about ideas like that I wasn't able to do in the television world, but I can do now.
It looks so real. I was looking at YouTube for the game and I saw some clips of Oracle Park and it looks just like it. I'm a San Francisco Giants fan, so it looks just identical. And I mean, kudos to the people who create that game. But I even noticed the camera angles were broadcast quality type.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was really interesting.
Yeah. So we go our attention to detail is extremely high. Like, we'll go through and actually adjust, for example, the camera 4, which is the camera that you show pitches with, right? We'll adjust that from ballpark to ballpark to be the same framing that their home network uses. So if you play in San Francisco, you'll have a slightly different camera angle that matches where their camera well is than if you played in Seattle. It would be where Seattle's camera well is. So we definitely match all that stuff so that we're getting the same stuff. When there's some stadiums have kind of iconic shots, just to mention those 2 stadiums again, like when there's a splash hit in San Francisco, we have the camera that kind of shows that high up. It's like a high first camera that pans over and shows the ball go into the water with all the kayakers racing after it. Seattle has a really cool sky cam that I don't see in any other ballparks, where you get those cool flying shots. So we have that in Seattle in our game, and several others where we really do try to match like exactly what you're seeing, so that you feel like you're watching your home network. And then one other cool thing we did this past year is we did these fan cams, is what I called them, and I kind of picked iconic seats in the stadium and gave the user control to look around, which I just thought was cool. If you have never been to Fenway Park and sat on the Green Monster, you get the view of that, and you can see like the game from those angles. And we did that in every stadium. So I think there's like 300 cameras in all the stadiums that emulate like you actually being in the stands and give you control to look any direction, 360, any direction you want to. So those were pretty fun to do as well.
What's been the response so far in the few months that it's been out?
It's been good. Yeah, we're people love our game. I think baseball is a strong sport, and I my favorite part about it is we get to kind of reach the younger generation of baseball fans, and we fully embrace like bat flips and case strides and all the fun stuff that baseball's doing now. We're right along with that, so we're kind of making sure that the cameras are showing the bat flips and the pitchers and all that kind of thing. So it's just been the response has always been great since I've been here. People love our game, and our community is great. So it's been fun. It's honestly a different community than I knew existed when I came over here, but it's really strong and really loyal, and it's a fun thing to be able to bring out this game every year for those people. And like kids, like I'll tell you, like you probably know this too. Like when I was at ESPN and I would tell people, people would be like, "Oh, that's a cool job." I never had the response I have now, that when I tell people, and it's usually not the guy that I tell, he's like, "I have to call my son." Like he'll call their 12-year-old and say like, "Hey man, I'm playing golf right now with the guy that designs MLB The Show," and his kid's like going crazy. So it's weird. Like the people that care about the game are like really, really, really enthusiastic about it.
With the game on its way, out there, are you planning for the next edition? And
oh yeah,
and how can you top what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's hard. I tell people it's probably more similar to like producing a Super Bowl if you only produced the Super Bowl, like you did nothing else all year, but you wanted the Super Bowl to go off, and you had the whole year to come up with like what cameras you were going to use, what your graphics package was going to look like, what you were going to do in the open, all that stuff. So it's just way different from what I used to do when I would be doing multiple games a week. It's one game a year, and you're just striving to make it better every year. But yeah, it's definitely different, and you have to learn to use the tools that keep you, because just your workflow doing multiple games a week, you're kind of like, okay, prep one day, do the game the next day, prep one day. And here it's just like prep every day. But we have a great schedule. We have plenty of people that keep us on task. And so, yeah, we pretty much start, shortly after the last game is shipped, we start cooking up ideas for the next year, and then we go into production, and we're always trying to make it better. I think it's exciting. And it's cool that you get to keep building on something. It's not like you have to start all over, right? We can take out things that maybe we didn't like, but we can always take the product and make it better. And it's cool because we have such a good product already that all we can do is make it better, in my opinion. So I think it keeps getting better, and it's fun to push yourself. So far, I haven't come to the point where I'm like, man, I don't know what else to do. Like I don't think I'll ever get there, but I think you can always come up with new ideas and do things a little differently and more exciting. And there's new players, there's new trends in the sport. Like baseball has changed so much in the past few years to the way that, like I mentioned earlier, it's just the bat flips, the fun is kind of back in baseball, and the home runs gotten bigger, the strikeouts gotten more common. Maybe not always a good thing, but as the trend change, you want your game to change as well. So, and broadcast changes too, right? Like I don't want to say it's a one-way street where I'm like only innovating and hoping TV does some of this stuff. It's like as TV comes up with great ideas too all the time, that I'm like, oh, we should do that.
You had mentioned some of the reactions you get from people that you talk to that call their kids. Mm-hmm. How excited does that make you?
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool. More just because like when you're at a stadium or you're at a sports bar, when you're at ESPN, you can actually see, people watching ESPN, and it's sort of gratifying, knowing that they're seeing what you're doing. In the video game industry, like you don't have as much vision into that. So when you get that feedback and like how this kid is obsessed with this game, and we hear a lot of really cool stories too about how it's like gotten them into baseball, or maybe they don't love watching baseball, but they know all the baseball storylines, and their batting stance is like Juan Soto because of our baseball game. Like it's just another way to reach sports fans, which is something that I always thought was really cool at ESPN. Is like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I grew up watching Ken Griffey Jr. and Sean Kemp on TV, and it was like I hope I'm like paying that back to some people that are 12 years old and playing our game and getting excited about baseball, and maybe getting excited about their own baseball career, or just bringing some sort of happiness to them through our game.
I think it's really, really fun what you're doing. And, I wish I was a gamer a little more, because when I saw that on YouTube, I was like, wow, maybe I should get this game because it looks really cool.
I can hook you up.
Oh, perfect. We mentioned baseball is a big part of your life. We said at the top of the show, that's how we met, when we were playing for a men's adult baseball league in Bristol, Connecticut called the Bristol Knights. So I just want to visit a couple of things with you and
Sure.
get your thoughts on that. You actually ended up getting a baseball card.
I did.
I didn't. But what was it like playing on this baseball team?
It was fun. It was fun, man. Like I was, I played for the Bristol Knights from like 2008 till 2011. So I was sort of freshly out of college. So I still had my arm on me. It was a great way to just meet some other people too, like especially some non-ESPN people, because Bristol can be such a bubble. So it was awesome. I have great memories of the Bristol Knights.
And that was me in the background.
Yeah.
Right behind you, backing you up as you're pitching.
Yeah.
I went ahead and took the liberty of looking at the Bristol Knights website
to
find your stat sheet. And I found it. So first,
oh no,
I don't know if you can see it there, but your pitching ERA was a 1.88, which
there we go.
Pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And then I was looking at the batting stats.
Yeah,
and
not as
this
good.
Is what I no. Well, it wasn't terrible, but this is what I noticed.
Yeah.
Look at our batting average differences.
You got me.
By .001.
Yeah, I got you in slugging percentage and stolen bases. Oh no, you got me in stolen bases. I'm gonna have to go back to Bristol and play a couple games just to bump up that average like 1 or 2 points higher.
Well, they're playing where the Hartford Goats or Yard Goats play, which is kind of a nice thing. So I might have to. Maybe we'll make a trip out together.
Exactly. Oh, well, the only problem is I probably wouldn't be able to get any hits anymore, and I'd probably like fall farther behind.
I'd probably break something on my body just getting so old.
There you are.
Yeah, there's a couple pictures of me there.
Look at that swing. That's a hit.
So now I want to just kind of revisit some of the pictures of your career. What are we seeing here?
Oh, this is actually funny that I'm holding a camera because a lot of the directors that I work next to as a producer would laugh because I don't even know how to work that camera. But I was a producer on a ENG shoot there in Seattle, and that suit actually was basically a flotation device, so I wouldn't sink out of the boat. So that was it was pretty cool though. Like I grew up going to Seattle games, so to be able to like help produce a game in Seattle was super fun for me.
And what's the story of this picture?
I produced a lot of baseball games, and these were the my two on-air talent, Keith Moreland and Greg Swindell, two former big leaguers that we worked together for 8 years probably, and had a lot of good, really fun times together. So that was us, I think, pre-game in the dugout one day. And yep, this was another game. Probably I did a ton of college baseball. Produced super regionals and regionals every year. So I think this is pre-game in one of those. And then that's me with my pal Bevo. Got to produce quite a few Texas football games as well, which is pretty cool.
What's the difference between college football and baseball as far as coverage goes? And just the feeling of it, not necessarily the mechanics of it.
Yeah, I mean, college football is basically a professional sport, right? When it comes to the pageantry and everything that surrounds it, and just the amount of eyeballs that are on it. College baseball was more just something that I was really passionate about. That brought me the joy, whereas like football, it just felt like football just feels so much bigger, and you prepare all week for a football game, whereas a baseball game you might do 4 or 5 in 1 week, so you have like a lot less time to put energy into each broadcast. I'm sure like anybody that covers a regional baseball team would understand, when they're doing 162 games a year, you're just it becomes more of a daily thing, whereas like football, like you really get that build up throughout the week, and 100,000 people are in the stands. You can feel the truck shaking. Like football's just a whole different beast.
This one,
I mentioned volleyball earlier. I eventually got the opportunity to produce 3 NCAA volleyball championships. That's Karch Karai and Paul Sunderland that were the announcers for those. So that was pretty cool, crowning a champion and really getting to pay off all the hard work that those athletes do to achieve that. So like I always wanted to produce a championship, so that was pretty cool to do every year.
Yeah, Paul Sunderland is such a great guy. I've produced a few events with him, Boston Marathon, and also some beach volleyball and indoor volleyball. They're just true professionals.
Oh yeah, I made a joke with that picture because I think there was like 8 Olympic gold medals combined in that picture. Mm-hmm. And I had 0, and Paul
had
I think
zero.
had 1, and Karch has a handful of them.
Yeah. All right. As we wind down this podcast, I appreciate you being with me. I still learn a lot to this day. I got just a couple more questions. What's
Sure.
the most what was your first event that you ever worked? That you have a credential for?
Oh yeah, I brought that with me. So this is see that this is 2002 St. Louis Cardinals. A really good friend of mine named Prabin Martin, who was a director at for ESPN. I had graduated high school about a month or 2 prior to that credential. I had no idea what I was doing, but I went out with him to an event, and he got me a job as a runner. So it was crazy. Like I don't even know if I'd ever been on a Major League Baseball field, and he had me cue the first pitch to the umpire, so I had to stand on the field. And at that time, it was felt like the most important thing I'd ever done, and all I had to do was take a towel off my neck or something like that. So that was my first one. St. Louis. It was Sunday Night Baseball back in the day when it was Joe Morgan and John Miller.
Yep. Yeah. And then finally, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. What's your favorite sports movie of all time?
Ooh. Man, I go back and forth. It's definitely a baseball movie. I'm a comedy guy. So I'm gonna go Major League. It's my favorite sports movie. I can quote
Major
that
League.
whole movie. Yeah.
All right, let's hear a couple of lines from it then.
Throw him the heater, Ricky. Yeah, that's my favorite because it's got the drama, but it has so many memorable lines.
Drew, thank you again for your time. It's nice catching up to you, hearing what you're doing at MLB The Show, and I look forward to the next version.
Yeah, man.
And
we got to get
best
you.
of luck to you in the future.
We got to get you a PlayStation so you can play me sometime. Get you going. You can be the Giants.
I'd love that.
All right.
Well, Drew seems to have found his dream job after his dream job, continuing with baseball and transforming how gamers view MLB The Show. So I congratulate him, and I can't wait to get a copy of it soon. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the innovations he's made in the game coverage, so be sure to visit the YouTube page or the Facebook page and leave a comment. Also be sure to subscribe to @SportsMaking and take a listen to other great episodes while you're there. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making. I'm Don Cardona.